I know that a lot of you, like me, are fascinated by the Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. And what with films like Zulu and Zulu Dawn, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the only battles were those of Rorke and Isandlwana. But did you know, on the very same morning that the British camp at Isandlwana was being overwhelmed by the Zulus, the British actually won another battle, 100 miles away. In a fight lasting less than 90 minutes, 12 British lost their lives, whilst around them on the rolling hills of Zululand lay the bodies of 400 Zulu warriors. It was also, incidentally, the first land battle in which the British used a Gatling gun. But Isandlwana and Rorke later that day completely overshadowed it, and it became a mere footnote, if that, in most people's understanding of the Zulu Wars. So, it's time to share with you this forgotten battle, the Battle of Inyezane. I've told the story about why the British were even fighting the Zulus in previous episodes, so I won't go into the details now, but I will post a link at the end. The British commander, Lord Chelmsford's strategy was to invade from three directions and advance on the Zulu capital at Ulundi for a showdown with King Eshowe's warriors. His number 3 column would be joined by Sir Evelyn Wood's number 4 column advancing from the northwest and number 1 column commanded by Colonel Charles Pearson advancing from the coast. And it was this number 1 column commanded by Colonel Pearson which fought the Battle of Inyezane. Born in 1834, Charles Pearson joined the army when he was 18, being commissioned in the 99th Regiment. Transferring to the 31st Regiment of Foot, he saw action in the Crimean War at the siege of Sebastopol and the storming of the Redan, where he was mentioned in dispatches. In 1857, he purchased a captaincy in the 3rd Regiment, also known as the Buffs. Shortly after the Zulu War, the Buffs would become the Royal East Kent Regiment. Pearson gathered number 1 column on the south side of the Tugela River in the British colony of Natal. It was a sizable force, consisting of regular British troops, a Royal Navy brigade, local colonial mounted men, and African auxiliaries. Central to his strength were 400 men from the 2nd Battalion of his own Buffs, the 3rd or East Kent Regiment. He also had 160 men from the 99th Regiment, the Duke of Edinburgh's Lanarkshires, which was by chance the regiment he'd started his army career with. 90 Royal Engineers, supported by 60 men from the Natal native pioneers, would be responsible for building a pontoon to ferry Pearson's column across the river. They would then deal with the countless physical obstacles as they advanced into Zululand. 200 sailors and Royal Marines from HMS Active and HMS Tendos formed a naval brigade. It's one of the features of 19th century British campaigns that local Royal Navy warships supplied sailors to augment land forces. And before you think they were just making up the numbers, they were highly efficient fighting forces, often as good as the infantry regiments they served alongside. They also brought 2 7-pounders to add to the Royal Artillery's 2 pieces, and a Gatling gun. Developed by American Richard Jordan Gatling in the early 1860s, the Gatling gun was an early machine gun and had never been used by the British in a land war before. This machine gun was commanded by 18-year-old midshipman Louis Cadwallader Coker. The largest part of the column was made up of members of the Natal native contingent, numbering just over 1,600 men. With little to distinguish them in uniform or weapons from the Zulus, they were to be used for scouting and pursuing fleeing enemy. There was also a mounted force under 30-year-old Major Percy Barrow, on secondment from the 19th Hussars, consisting of 115 mounted infantry and 117 colonial volunteers from Natal Colony. And finally, there were 600 civilians responsible for the 400-plus ox wagons carrying supplies for the column. Upon the expiry of the British ultimatum to the Zulus on the 11th of January 1879, Lord Chelmsford invaded Zululand with the central number 3 column. In the days prior to that, the Naval Brigade and Royal Engineers had constructed a pontoon to transport Pearson's force across the 300-yard fast-flowing Tugela River. During the process, several men were swept downriver. One, able seaman Dan Martin, drowned and his body was never recovered. Martin, therefore, became the first official British casualty in this war, even before it had officially started. Now with war declared, Pearson spent 2 whole days using those pontoons to ferry his men across to the Zulu shore. Having left a small force of sailors to guard the crossing, Pearson now set out for the deserted mission station at Eshowe, about 37 miles inside Zululand. He intended to fortify the station and use it as a forward base for his advance on the Zulu capital. The journey along a rough trader's track through thick vegetation and crossing countless streams was incredibly slow. The wagons were churning the old track into a quagmire. It took them a week to cover 30 miles. The column itself was strung out over several miles, and the British were placing themselves in a very vulnerable, if not calamitous, position if the Zulus attacked. Or was it more when they attacked? Because unknown to Pearson, King Eshowe had dispatched an impi or army comprising of 3,500 men from his capital to deal with number 1 column. As it advanced, it was joined by further warriors, so that by the morning of the 21st of January, the Zulu army numbered somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 warriors. That same day, Pearson sent a strong detachment to scout a royal kraal at Gingindlovu, about 6 miles to the east of his advance, where there were reports of a Zulu army. However, when they arrived, they found the kraal deserted, apart from an old woman who was a bit befuddled and hadn't got a clue what was going on or where everyone else had gone. The British proceeded to use the kraal for some artillery practice before torching it. As they left the burning kraal, they didn't realise that they were being watched by Zulu scouts. Word of the destruction of the royal kraal swiftly arrived with the Zulu commander. Enraged, he decided to attack Pearson's camp that very night. The Zulu warriors silently followed the trail left by Pearson's raiding party and found the column fast asleep. However, the Zulu commander now decided that it was impossible to organise a coordinated attack in the dark in a terrain that his men didn't actually know. Moreover, the British sentries constantly calling out challenges to each other, the "halt, who goes there" sort of thing, led him to believe that his army had been spotted. He decided on a new plan: to ambush Pearson on the march the following day. And as silently as they had arrived, his army vanished back into the night, and Pearson knew nothing about his close shave. But next morning he did, when his scouts spotted the grass around the camp flattened by what was obviously thousands of warriors. If Pearson was perturbed, he didn't show it, ordering his column to continue its advance. As a precaution, however, he ordered Major Barrow to send his mounted men ahead to provide early warning if they met the enemy. They were out there somewhere, but where? Ironically, at the same time, Lord Chelmsford was dividing his number 3 column at Isandlwana and setting out to find the main Zulu army. He too wasn't exactly sure where his enemy lay either. It was the 22nd of January, 1879. As Pearson crossed the Inyezane stream, he was faced by a steep, E-shaped ridge. The track led up the central ridge, with the other 2 ridges running roughly parallel to it, with deep ravines packed with dense vegetation in between. Towards the top of the central spur, just to the right of the track, was a hill. Little did Pearson know that behind that hill, the Zulu army was waiting for him. After about 3.5 hours, with the leading part of the column having crossed the Inyezane, Pearson was persuaded to stop for breakfast by Major Barrow. They chose a flat grassy knoll just as the land ascended up the ridge. Surrounded by dense vegetation, Pearson wasn't too keen on the spot, but as there was no sign of the enemy, he agreed. Some of the mounted men even took the opportunity to take a quick bath in the stream. At around 8 a.m, a few Zulus appeared on the skyline adjacent to the hill, but apart from that, there was no sign of the enemy. Pearson ordered Lieutenant Hart to take a company of the NNC up the track to clear them away. As the NNC moved up the slope, the Zulus suddenly dropped down into the ravine and appeared on the spur to their right, about a quarter of a mile away. Hart ordered his men to right turn and drop into the ravine and advance up the right-hand ridge. Many of the NNC hesitated. How many Zulus were hiding in that vegetation down there? With their white officers and NCOs, many of whom spoke no local languages, urging them on, they reluctantly descended into the ravine. As they finally emerged on the other side and started to form up again, a dense mass of Zulus suddenly appeared on the crest of the ridge and opened a sporadic fire before pouring down the slope towards them. The NNC men, armed with just 10 firearms between them, took one look at the advancing Zulus and fled back through the ravine. Some of their officers and NCOs made a stand, but they were wiped out. The firing and shouting alerted Pearson and the rest of the column. Despite not knowing exactly what was going on ahead of him, Pearson knew something was up, and that also somewhere in the vicinity were thousands of Zulu warriors. He also knew that with his column strung out over several miles, he was in an extremely dangerous position. He decided that his best course of action was to rush as many of his men across the stream and up the central spur as possible. Pearson, joined by his buffs, the Royal Artillery and the Naval Brigade, formed up on the knoll where the interrupted breakfast had just been taking place. The buffs unfurled both their Queen's and regimental colours, and then the British proceeded to fire on the advancing Zulus. Now joining them were the men of the 99th, panting as they ascended the track on an unseasonably hot day. The fire of 600 rifles filled the air, punctuated by the boom of 2 artillery guns. The Zulus took cover in the dense vegetation, from where they moved ever closer whilst firing back at the British. Midshipman Coker and his Gatling gun came lumbering up the track. Bringing his gun to a rest, he now opened up on the invisible Zulus shooting at the British from the vegetation. Having fired 300 rounds, his Gatling jammed. But that short burst was the first time the British had fired a Gatling gun in a land battle. It also disconcerted the Zulus. Faced with this intense firepower, the Zulus on the right spur started to fall back. Barrow now ordered his mounted troops down into the ravine to flush out any Zulus remaining there. As he did so, another force of Zulus came from behind the hill and started down the central spur, taking up a position in a deserted homestead. And now even more Zulus started to appear at the head of the left-hand spur. This was the classic Horns of the Buffalo Zulu attacking model, and it was part of their commander's carefully laid trap for Pearson. The only problem was that the left horn had appeared too soon on that right spur and alerted the British. The artillery now swung their guns to shell the homestead, whilst Pearson ordered his own regiment, the 2nd Battalion East Kents, the Buffs and the Naval Brigade, up the central ridge to push the Zulus back over the crest of the spur. In classic inter-service rivalry, it rapidly became a race between the Buffs and the Blue Jackets as to who would get up there first. It was the sailors who reached the summit first, charging with both bayonets and naval cutlasses. The Zulus fell back. Meanwhile, the mounted skirmishers were now ascending the right spur, driving back the Zulu left horn, who had started this whole battle in the first place. The Zulus had had enough for one day, and across the battlefield they started to retreat in very good order. It was now 9:30 a.m. The Battle of Inyezane had lasted around 90 minutes. 10 NNC had been killed in that initial attack. 2 Buffs had died later in the fighting, and Pearson's column suffered a further 20 wounded, of whom 2 would die later from their wounds. A quick head count by the British estimated 400 Zulu dead. Many more injured warriors had been helped off the battlefield by their comrades. Unlike subsequent battles in this war, the mounted troops did not pursue the fleeing Zulus. In fact, many Zulu wounded were treated and given water by the British. The battle was a victory for the British, and Pearson resumed his march to Eshowe, arriving at the mission station the next day. But it might have turned out very differently. If the Zulu left horn had not attacked early, or the Zulu centre and right horn followed up more swiftly, it's an interesting debate what might have happened had they been able to spring their trap on Pearson's strung-out column. However, 100 miles away, the Zulus were about to gain an incredible victory, and to quote one of the great lines from the film Zulu, "The army doesn't like more than one disaster in a day, looks bad in the newspapers, and upsets the civilians at their breakfast." About an hour after Pearson's guns had fallen silent, over 20,000 Zulu warriors poured over the skyline and wiped out the British camp at Isandlwana. And the rest, as they say, is history. With that catastrophic defeat, or great victory if you're a Zulu, and the defence of Rorke's Drift, the Battle of Inyezane, the first major engagement of this war, swiftly faded from popular memory. Well, until now. 19th century British history has so many forgotten stories and characters, and I love sharing them with you. If you're a bit of a fan, then check out my supporters club, where I host regular members-only shows and discussions, where we go into a lot more detail. Find out more by clicking on the link in the description below. Thanks for joining me today. Keep well, and I'll see you again very soon.